Thanks for staying with us on the program. Now, the 2023 Global Organized Crime Index reveals that South Africa's criminality score has risen to 7.18 out of 10, making it the 7th highest globally and the 3rd highest in Africa, indicating a deep-rooted criminal economy fueled by corruption that has eroded trust in government and law enforcement. Now, getting straight to the conversation, I'm joined by Thabang Bogopa, an independent researcher in South Africa. Thank you so much, Thabang, for joining me.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to the listeners and the viewers at home.
Good afternoon, Thabang. Very shortly, we would also be joined by Professor Shimangazo Oscar Magadze, University of South Africa, Department of Criminology and Security Science. But in the meantime, Thabang, what can we say are the factors that contribute to this assessment? We know about the road rage, the rate of murder cases, rape cases in South Africa. What are the factors that contribute to this level of crime rate in the country?
Oh, thank you so much. Firstly, just the crime culture. South Africa has now a high rate of criminality culture. But then also the truth is that South Africa is still facing some of the highest social exclusion. So looking at organized crime, it will be that the only feasible way for other people to make money or to participate commercially would be if they are part of organized crimes. I'm saying that because South Africa has been at the fore of business in Africa and the inter-Africa trade. However, if you check the Johannesburg Stock Exchange listed companies, 98%, close to 98% of those companies are white owned, which means that Black people in South Africa are still minority players in terms of the mainstream economy of this country, which pushes people to criminal activities, although that is not justifiable, but it is one of the greatest contributors. The issue of poverty is also a main contributor in South Africa. There's still a high margin of the difference between those who are doing well and those who are still in the poorest echelons of life in the society. That also attributes then to the issue of high migration in South Africa. South Africa has one of the highest migration in African continent. These are the people who cannot get jobs or get work through any formal economic stream. They end up being recruited for cheap labor, but also recruited for criminal activities in this country. Thank you.
Okay, how would we say that this level of crime or the rate at which the crime rate is growing, how do we say that it will affect tourism in the country, seen as the country is now tagged as a riskier destination?
Yes, I just wanted to tap on that even the Institute of Economics and Peace has published a global peace index which rated South Africa as one of the most unpeaceful places to go. Then that affects the level of tourism that we can attract as a country. People who would travel to this country for pure tourist purposes end up choosing other countries. And if you check recently, the tourism in South Africa is dropping. People who are coming to South Africa are not coming for leisure. They are mostly coming to seek better opportunities and as well as participating in these criminal activities. So it is affecting us. It is also affecting us in terms of the GDP that was supposed to be gained from economic activities that are derived from tourism. So it is badly affecting us as a country.
Okay, Thabang, about 82 people are killed every day in South Africa, and that's according to the police minister. What would we say the security structure is like? Do we say, because you mentioned earlier that there is a crime culture in South Africa, can we say that maybe it's the lack of negligence that is leading to this much crime, that almost 82 persons are killed every day in South Africa? What's the security structure like?
Yeah, firstly, we have to admit that the conviction rate in South Africa is low. We know that. But also, the prison population in South Africa is more than 7 times what it was supposed to be. So all the prisons in South Africa are overpopulated. Currently, South Africa is doing their best. You know, South Africa is a democratic country. The law is it's fair. I'll put it that way. It's fair. You are innocent until you are proven guilty. Now, that's where people get the opportunity to do as they wish, but also the opportunity to get away more with crime. But then you know the broken window theory that when people see more of criminal activities happening, they end up inspired to think that crime is the way out, and which is now creating more problems that we spend more money as a country in terms of arresting people, convicting and rehabilitation as well as correction. So in that process, the country spends a lot of money dealing with convicts, and that weakens the security system in its entirety. Security is mostly enjoyed then by those who can afford private security. But then the issue and the nature in which private security is happening in South Africa is that people are now interested more in perpetuating or pursuing criminal activities to raise the demand for private security, which is a very complex phenomenon on its own.
Okay, let's also talk about the rate at which these criminals are convicted. Now, one criticism that South Africa receives from international bodies and other countries is the fact that there is always low conviction rate, and that's because we hear more of these crimes being committed. We hear more of murders being perpetrated, but we don't hear a lot about conviction of these criminals. What is being done about that?
Yeah, as I've mentioned that the justice system in South Africa, it's more fair than in many countries. You know that the Constitution of South Africa, it's one of the best. It's rated as one of the best. The notion that you are innocent until you are proven guilty. The notion that crime must be proven beyond reasonable doubt, of which in other countries, criminality or the conviction is just proven on a preponderance of probabilities. In South Africa, there must be real evidence that the person has committed a particular crime for them to be convicted. But then also, as we have mentioned, that the justice system in South Africa, it's overburdened. The prosecutors self, they have a high roll of cases. The high roll of cases then means that there's very little time to prepare. If you have high court prosecutors who have to prepare for a high roll of murder cases and serious robberies, the preparation towards presenting a solid case then becomes very diminished. And that also affects the output in terms of the conviction rate. And that's why I think the challenge is, but however, big up to the justice system in South Africa, a lot of positive outcome is being done. And if you check their conviction rate in terms of the serious offenses, it's commendable if you compare to other places in the world. Of course, when you take the entire pool of criminal offenses, which include petty offenses, yes, you can say that our criminal conviction rate is a bit low. However, on serious offenses, we've seen some of the most dangerous criminals and criminal gangs being convicted. And that's where we need to clap a hand for the justice system in South Africa, because once you are able to curb some of the more organized criminal activities, then you get a gentle or a gradual control in terms of convicting the actual criminals.
Now, you
And
did
maybe
mention, okay, Thabang,
Yes.
you did mention that some of the reasons for these rates at which the crime level is growing is unemployment, there's also poverty and all that. So we do know the reasons, but who are the people perpetrating these acts? Are they the youths? Are they the older people? Are they, the citizens who are agitating against external people from other foreigners coming into the country? Who exactly are the perpetrators of these acts that is making the crime rate rise as much?
Thank you so much. If you've been to South Africa, you'll know that South Africa is one of, I would say, the most welcoming country. If you go to the provinces that are close to the borders, you go to your Limpopo, your Mpumalanga, Northwest, KZN, which are neighboring to Zimbabwe, Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Swaziland. You have people from nearby countries walking in and living normal in South Africa. You have your Pakistani and Somalian national coming in South Africa and living normal operating businesses, working and doing that peacefully. So the criminal activity that we've observed and the type of the offender that we've observed recently in South Africa, the truth is we have a high volume of illegal immigrants from different countries committing crime in South Africa. That could be attested by the number of offenders that have to be deported to their countries and the number of offenders that are at Lindela. There's a repatriation center called Lindela in South Africa. It's always overpopulated, meaning that we have more offenders from different countries that are coming into South Africa for committing criminal offenses. Now let's look at the most serious offenses, your pre-scheduled murders, your serious robberies. It's normally done by people from the African countries which gave them the military training, and those people are no longer employed in their countries. You'll understand that military training is no longer compulsory in South Africa. It's a career. But in most African countries, people get military training from a very young, tender age. And indeed, that leads us to also identifying that we have more youth, 21 to 35, being more offenders of these very serious criminal activities. And of course, we do have most uneducated youth from South Africa also participating in these criminal activities because there's a high migration to the major cities, being your Pretoria, your Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban in South Africa. And people, when they arrive there and they can't find employment, they end up being recruited by criminal syndicates for them just to survive.
All right. Now, speaking of the youth 18 to 35, we have talked extensively about several rehabilitation programs. In fact, I also did some reports about some programs in South Africa that enable the youth to come together to do something more meaningful with their lives and, you know, help them stay away from committing such crimes. To what extent would you say that these programs actually help the youth in South Africa? Is there an improvement? I mean, obviously not, according to international bodies, because if we're having an improvement, we won't have this much crime rate. So what is wrong there? These programs should be helping the youth stay away from crimes, but we're still having a high crime rate. What is the problem?
Thank you so much. Luckily and glad enough, I was part of a youth empowerment event for 3 days. We just concluded today. So I want to say that there's actually positive outcome and positive output from the youth empowerment and youth development programs in South Africa. I would say South Africa is one of the best in terms of offering youth empowerment programs, also in terms of offering the youth funding, because that's what most youth need. But it still becomes a challenge in uncivilized and remote areas. If you look at Gauteng, where I think most reportings emerge from, Gauteng has more informal settlement. Now, people from informal settlement still have a lot of challenges themselves in terms of accessing the programs that exist and also in terms of scaling up whatever business that they are trying. So my observation is that the youth empowerment programs are doing their best. However, we can improve on also commercializing and actually creating a market base for the youth startups and the youth businesses. And looking at the inter-Africa trade, which is pushed at all costs, I think South African youth and African youth at large could get a very better opportunity of trading among Africa, and then that will also cap this criminal activity to a greater margin.
Right. Now, if we're looking at the statistics, right, it is not just South Africa in Africa that has a high crime rate. I mean, South Africa is just third on the continent. What would you say are the similarities between SA and other countries that have been identified with high levels of organized crimes, especially like Nigeria?
Yes, ma'am. At the depth of this is the issue of poverty. That's the greatest similarity. But then secondly, it will be the social exclusion. When people feel excluded from certain opportunities, when the indigent communities feel excluded from some of the mainstream economic activities and economic opportunities, they end up resorting to crime. That's the central similarity.
Okay, and what do you think the government can do about this kind of exclusions? We've always clamored for youth involvement in political decisions, youth being at the forefront of decision-making processes in the country or on the continent. So what can various governments do about it?
Thank you so much. Having mentioned government, let us accept that government is globally the greatest consumer. If you check, the multi-billion companies are somehow doing business with the state or procuring with the state. So if the government could have a certain quota of the entire procurement being reserved for previously disadvantaged youth, and I'm choosing on the ways that it must be previously disadvantaged youth, because you don't want prime minister's children and the mayor's kids coming and grabbing the same opportunities that were supposed to be grabbed by previously disadvantaged youth. So if the government could procure a lot of its services with previously disadvantaged youth startups, as well as cooperatives formed by youth, then we would curb crime. But this thing of you go to an African country, you find one young millionaire. The rest are not employed, they are not educated or trained. It's still not addressing the challenge. You know, Africa is one of those places whereby you go to a certain area, you find one wealthiest person and you find another 10,000 poorest people. And that was because of the government's failure to fairly distribute opportunities as in when they arise.
Right. Okay. One last question before we let you go. Now, if you look at the reasons for this that you have talked about, you've mentioned extensively on this show, some people would also say that in these countries, the lack of access to education and the lack of employment as well is a causative factor. Now, we do know that the onus is on the government to make sure that there is a reduction in the number of out-of-school children. But in the aspect of employment, right, there's only so much the government can do. We have clamored for employment opportunities for a long time. Now, what can the youths themselves do to liberate themselves from poverty and avoid falling into the category of people perpetrating these crimes?
Thank you so much. I would say commercialization of your own intellectual property, commercialization of your own academic outputs, and commercialization of your natural talent. We've seen the best sports people coming from Africa, the best comedians coming from Africa, the best social media influencers are mostly from Africa. You can go to your Twitter, your Instagram, your TikTok. Those are some of the niches and opportunities that the youth in Africa could tap into, because those have limitless or boundaryless opportunities. And if youth in Africa could also attempt to commercialize even their indigenous knowledges, because we've seen that there's actually a high demand for indigenous knowledge systems. So the youth in Africa should commercialize whatever that they are good at. And of course, do not limit yourself to the boundaries of your country. We have a lot of African youth in South Africa that are making a change in our country. We have a lot of African migrants in South Africa who are doing the best works. In some of our businesses, we rely more on them than any other people. So we need to be borderless. Of course, that's at a theoretical level, but do not limit yourself to what you see in your country. You may find that the skills and abilities that you have are in a higher demand in another province or another region or another country. That's my best advice to the youth in Africa.
Okay, Thabang Bogopa, thank you so much for joining us, independent researcher from South Africa. Thank you for your time with us on the show.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. You're still watching VSA, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at human rights violation in Tunisia and the role that Amnesty International as well as the European Union are playing in the mix. Do stay with us.